All right, my friends, gather around for a story. Picture this: a land where the sun beats down mercilessly, where the soil cracks like broken glass, and the horizon shimmers with heat. For generations, the Sahel has been a place where survival meant endurance, scraping food from barren fields, watching children leave villages for cities, and bowing to the cruelty of drought. But then, almost overnight, something impossible happened. Bulldozers carved deep furrows into the earth, villagers lined up with saplings in their hands, and 20 million young cashew trees took root, not in decades, not in a lifetime, in just 3 years. The fields once covered with thorn and dust began to shimmer green. Rows upon rows of tender cashew leaves reflected the unforgiving sun like mirrors of defiance. It was one of the boldest agricultural campaigns Africa had ever seen. 20 million seeds of hope, or perhaps 20 million promises waiting to be broken. To President Ibrahim Traoré, these were not just trees. They were weapons in a war for dignity. Cashews, he declared, would replace cotton, the crop that had chained Burkina Faso to the violent whims of global markets. Cashews would free the nation from dependency, bring wealth to the villages, and prove that Africa could rise on its own. And yet, beneath the cheers, a haunting question lingers. Can 20 million cashew trees truly withstand the blazing Sahel sun, the ruthless drought, and the invisible hand of foreign corporations? Or will they wither, leaving behind nothing but dry branches and broken dreams? This is not just agriculture. This is a gamble with destiny. Stay with us, because what you are about to hear may shock you. If 20 million trees can change the Sahel, can they also change the fate of Africa itself? The announcement came on a blistering afternoon in Ouagadougou, the kind of day when the air itself feels heavy, when the dust clings to your skin and the sky burns a relentless white. Standing before thousands, President Ibrahim Traoré raised his voice and declared that Burkina Faso would plant 20 million cashew trees in just 3 years. For a moment, the crowd stood frozen in silence. And then, like thunder rolling across the Sahel, they erupted into cheers. To many, it sounded like a miracle. To others, it sounded like madness. Within weeks, the promise turned into action. Convoys of trucks painted with the national colors thundered into rural provinces, loaded with bundles of young saplings. Their roots were wrapped in burlap, their fragile leaves trembling in the dry wind. Bulldozers dug trenches through fields that had lain barren for decades. Soldiers, usually tasked with securing roads, now found themselves shoulder to shoulder with villagers, planting row after row from dawn until nightfall. The campaign became less a government program and more a national movement. Entire communities working in unison, bound by the idea that these trees could change their fate. In the first season alone, officials boasted that more than 50,000 hectares of land had been transformed into budding orchards. Villages that once knew only the brittle stalks of millet and sorghum suddenly shimmered with rows of green. The contrast was shocking. Where there had been emptiness, there was now the promise of shade, fruit, and above all, profit. For years, cotton had been the so-called white gold of Burkina Faso. It dominated exports, funded government budgets, and defined rural life. But it was also a curse. Prices swung violently, dictated not by African farmers but by subsidies in Washington and Brussels. One good harvest could be wiped out overnight by a drop in the international market. Many farmers fell into debt, their families left vulnerable, their children's futures mortgaged to a crop they could not control. Cashews, in contrast, seemed like liberation. Hardy and drought-resistant, they could survive in the unforgiving Sahel. Unlike cotton, they were not tied to Western subsidies. Global demand was rising steadily, fueled by changing diets from New York to Paris to Shanghai. The Food and Agriculture Organization estimated that consumption would nearly double by 2030. And unlike maize or millet, cashews carried the lure of export revenue, real money that could pay school fees, build clinics, and offer farmers more than subsistence. Ministers did not shy away from framing the initiative in grand terms. "This is not agriculture," one declared proudly. "This is liberation." The cashew tree was not simply a crop. It was a banner under which Burkina Faso would march toward economic sovereignty. In towns like Koudougou, farmers who had long struggled with meager harvests of millet gathered around the new plantations, whispering about fortunes to come. Women's cooperatives organized themselves to care for seedlings, already envisioning a future where they could process cashew butter and sell it in local markets. Even children were swept into the momentum. In classrooms, teachers spoke of the cashew as a symbol of rebirth, teaching lessons on soil management and trade as if they were lessons on destiny itself. But for all the hope, the risks were clear. Cashew trees take 3 to 5 years to bear fruit. They demand pruning, water, and careful protection from pests. Planting 20 million saplings was one thing, keeping them alive through years of punishing drought was another. Skeptics raised their voices, warning that the government's enthusiasm might outrun its ability to sustain the effort. In Kaya, an old farmer shook his head slowly as he watched the planting. "We have seen projects come and go," he said. "They begin with speeches and trucks. They end with dry fields." His words hung heavy, a reminder of how many past dreams had turned to dust. Yet despite the doubts, the enthusiasm spread. Markets buzzed with speculation about when the first cashews would reach Ouagadougou. Traders, sensing opportunity, began quietly positioning themselves for the harvest that was still years away. Even members of the military, drawn back to their home villages on leave, were seen helping families plant, their uniforms stained with the same earth that clung to the hands of farmers. The government fueled the optimism with data. A pilot program suggested that even modest cashew orchards could double household incomes within 5 years. Officials spoke of new processing plants that would keep value in the country, of cooperatives that would empower women, of factories that could create tens of thousands of jobs. Cashews, they promised, would not only replace cotton as the backbone of exports, but would redefine Burkina Faso's identity. The energy was undeniable. From the capital to the smallest hamlets, a single vision spread, that 20 million trees could rewrite the nation's story. But behind the fervor lingered a more unsettling question. Why cashews, and why now? Was this a carefully calculated economic strategy, or a desperate political gamble designed to inspire hope in dark times? For Ibrahim Traoré, the stakes could not have been higher. He had built his legitimacy not just on military strength, but on the promise that Burkina Faso could rise from dependency. To him, the cashew tree was more than a crop. It was a weapon, a shield, a statement. Planting 20 million was not just about agriculture, it was about sovereignty. And so the Sahel turned green. But as the orchards spread, so too did the doubts. Were these the seeds of prosperity, or the roots of a dangerous illusion? The answer, everyone knew, would take years to reveal. Yet the question was already burning. If Burkina Faso was gambling its future on a nut, would the payoff be golden harvests or bitter disappointment? By the second year of the campaign, something extraordinary happened. The first trees planted during those feverish early months began to flower, small clusters of cashew apples hanging like ornaments against the Sahel sky. Farmers gathered around them as if witnessing a miracle. Children laughed and pointed at the bright red and yellow fruits, their parents whispering prayers that these fragile beginnings would one day turn into wealth. In Ziniare, a farmer named Asu held up a basket with tears in his eyes. "Cotton gave me nothing but debt," he said softly. "These nuts, they are gold." His words spread like wildfire, repeated in markets and on radio broadcasts, feeding the growing belief that Burkina Faso had stumbled onto its salvation. For the first time in decades, optimism outpaced despair. But alongside the joy, a storm of reaction began to gather, at home, in the region, and across the globe. Inside Burkina Faso, the enthusiasm was electric. Families who sold even modest amounts of cashews reported incomes 30% higher than what cotton had once provided. Shops sprang up in villages that had never known steady commerce, selling soap, bicycles, and radios. Women's cooperatives flourished, with groups of mothers running seedling nurseries, earning their own income independent from their husbands. In classrooms, teachers began weaving cashew cultivation into science lessons. Children were no longer just learning how to read and count. They were learning how to grow wealth. The sense of rebirth was palpable. For many, cashews became more than a crop. They became a story of dignity, of defiance against poverty. The orchards stretching across the horizon were not just fields, they were symbols of national pride. Yet, not all voices sang in harmony. Elders muttered warnings in hushed tones. "You cannot eat cashews every day," one said. "Bread cannot be made from nuts." Their fear was not misplaced. Burkina Faso still relied on millet and sorghum to feed its population. If too much land and labor were diverted to cashews, food security itself could be put at risk. Others worried about water. In a region where rainfall was already scarce, could 20 million thirsty young trees survive without draining resources from staple crops? These doubts were amplified when the first signs of trouble appeared. A government report leaked to local journalists revealed that a severe drought had killed nearly 20% of the saplings in certain provinces. In villages where orchards once shimmered green, patches of withered brown now spread like scars across the land. For many, the drought was a reminder that no political vision, no matter how bold, could escape the brutal grip of the Sahel. But the reaction that shook the nation came not from nature but from the markets. Traders from neighboring countries, Ivory Coast, Ghana, Benin, arrived with trucks and cash, offering farmers immediate money for their raw cashews. Desperate after years of hardship, many sold their harvests for a fraction of the value. Trucks loaded with burlap sacks rumbled toward border crossings, carrying away the fruits of Burkina Faso's gamble. Within months, the same nuts reappeared in foreign supermarkets, under glossy labels reading, "Product of India," or "Packed in Vietnam." The scenes were jarring. Mothers who had dreamed of sending their children to school watched as their first cashew harvest disappeared overseas, enriching outsiders instead of their families. In Ouagadougou, one farmer spat bitterly. "They tricked us with cotton. Now they come again with cashews." The revelation sparked outrage. A leaked report warned that unless Burkina Faso built its own processing plants immediately, more than 80% of its cashews would be exported raw, repeating the same cycle of dependency that had crippled the cotton industry. The words cut deep. This is not independence. It is recolonization through commerce. The political fallout was immediate. Activists accused the government of moving too slowly, of allowing vultures to circle while promising factories that did not yet exist. Opposition leaders called the campaign a photo opportunity, a distraction designed to buy loyalty with green fields and speeches. International analysts began questioning whether Ibrahim Traoré's revolution was already unraveling. Yet Traoré refused to back down. In a televised address, he looked directly into the camera. "We will not ship away our future," he declared. "We will shell our own nuts, package our own kernels, and profit from our own labor." His words resonated, reigniting the pride that had fueled the campaign. Construction was announced for 3 major cashew processing plants, one in Bobo-Dioulasso, another in Koudougou, and a third in Ouagadougou. Smaller cooperative-owned factories were promised for rural areas. The impact was dramatic. By the second harvest, the first factory in Bobo-Dioulasso opened its doors. Women in bright headscarves worked modern machines, cracking shells and roasting kernels, their laughter mingling with the hum of equipment. For many, it was their first steady job. "I used to sell vegetables on the roadside," said Aminata, a young mother. "Now I turn our nuts into gold." The numbers were staggering. Within a year, the new facilities created over 50,000 jobs, many for women and youth who had once been locked out of the formal economy. Families that had been split apart by migration saw sons and daughters return, drawn by the chance to work in their own communities. But the reactions did not end at Burkina Faso's borders. In Ivory Coast, already the world's largest cashew producer, officials watched nervously. Some praised Burkina Faso's boldness, seeing it as a chance to strengthen West Africa's dominance in global markets. Others whispered about oversupply driving down prices. Ghana and Benin quietly expanded their own cashew projects, unwilling to let Burkina Faso seize the spotlight alone. Further afield, the ripples were even greater. In India and Vietnam, industry leaders raised alarms. For decades, their processing plants had depended on cheap African cashews. Burkina Faso's pledge to process half of its harvest domestically threatened to disrupt long-standing supply chains. European buyers, intrigued by the idea of fair trade African cashews, began sending delegations to Ouagadougou. American food companies hinted at new contracts, eager to market ethically sourced products. Suddenly, a landlocked country in the Sahel was rewriting the rules of a global industry. And yet, beneath the excitement, unease remained. Could these young factories truly compete with Asia's giants? Would corruption and mismanagement erode progress? And most dangerously of all, could the harsh climate destroy in a single season what had taken years to build? The paradox grew sharper with every harvest. Cashews were bringing real income, lifting villages, and creating pride. But they were also drawing in predators, exposing vulnerabilities, and testing the nation's resilience. The orchards stretched across the horizon, their green leaves shimmering under the sun. To some, they looked like the army of a new Burkina Faso, disciplined, resilient, unstoppable. To others, they looked fragile, a dream too delicate to survive the desert winds. And so the question burned hotter than ever. Would these 20 million trees become the roots of sovereignty, or the brittle branches of yet another broken promise? The cashew revolution did not only change fields, it began to reshape the fabric of Burkinabe society. In villages where poverty had long dictated life, cashews opened doors that many thought permanently sealed. Families who once struggled to scrape together school fees suddenly found themselves with enough to buy uniforms, books, even bicycles for their children. In some towns, the sale of cashew apples, once discarded in other countries, created new micro-industries. Juices, jams, and even animal feed began to appear in local markets. For the first time, rural households had options beyond bare subsistence. Women in particular experienced a seismic shift. Cooperatives sprouted across the countryside, bringing together groups of mothers and widows who now controlled their own cashew nurseries and processing ventures. "We used to wait for our husbands to give us money," said Mariam, the leader of one cooperative outside Koudougou. "Now we pay for school, food, even small investments ourselves." For many women, cashews meant independence. Husbands who once dismissed cashew work as trivial now depended on the steady income these cooperatives generated. The change was not just economic but cultural, a quiet revolution in gender roles unfolding beneath the cashew trees. Youth, too, began to reconsider their futures. Migration to Ouagadougou or abroad had long been a grim rite of passage for young men seeking survival. But with factories hiring tens of thousands and cooperatives offering apprenticeships, many chose to remain in their villages. The return of youth gave communities new energy. Small businesses emerged, repair shops, food stalls, mobile phone vendors, all sustained by the rising cashew economy. "Before my son wanted to leave for Côte d'Ivoire," one father explained. "Now he says he will stay and build here." Politically, the cashew campaign became the cornerstone of Ibrahim Traoré's legitimacy. His speeches tied sovereignty to cashews, portraying them as the antidote to dependency and the proof of national resilience. Supporters hailed him as a visionary, a leader who dared to turn barren soil into a weapon of dignity. "Traoré is planting not just trees," one minister declared, "he is planting freedom." Yet the political consequences were not universally positive. Critics accused the government of using the cashew revolution as propaganda, a green curtain hiding unresolved crises: terrorism, insecurity, corruption. Opposition leaders warned that enthusiasm for cashews risked distracting the nation from its fragile food security. "You cannot eat slogans," one opposition figure mocked. "You cannot live on promises of kernels." The debate spilled into parliament, where heated arguments broke out over budgets allocated to cashew projects, while other sectors languished. The leak of contracts with foreign traders deepened the political rift. Revelations that middlemen had secured rights to buy raw cashews at bargain prices inflamed public anger. Protesters marched in Ouagadougou carrying banners that read, "Not another cotton trap." Activists demanded transparency, urging the government to publish all agreements and ensure that profits stayed within the country. Traoré responded with fiery speeches and promises of stricter regulation, but suspicions lingered. Internationally, Burkina Faso's bold gamble made waves. The African Union praised the effort as a model for breaking free from commodity dependency. Development banks highlighted the campaign in glossy reports as evidence that African nations could chart their own course. But Western observers were more cautious. Analysts in Europe and the United States raised concerns about the sustainability of the project, questioning whether the young industry could withstand shocks from climate or markets. Some feared that if cashew prices fell, Burkina Faso might tumble into another cycle of debt. The environmental consequences added another layer of complexity. While cashew trees stabilized soil and offered shade, monoculture plantations carried risks of biodiversity loss. Environmentalists worried that dedicating massive tracts of land to cashews could weaken local ecosystems, leaving communities vulnerable if the crop failed. And then came the drought. Reports revealed that nearly 1/5 of the young trees had already died, a chilling reminder that no amount of political will could command the clouds. Despite the setbacks, the social transformations were undeniable. Families had more income, women more independence, youth more reasons to stay. But the paradox was clear. Prosperity was real, yet fragile. Every gain carried the shadow of potential collapse. At the national level, the stakes were immense. If cashews succeeded, Traoré's government could cement its legitimacy, redefine Burkina Faso's economy, and inspire a generation. If they failed, the disappointment would be devastating. Another chapter in the long history of broken promises. The cashew tree, once a symbol of resilience, could just as easily become a monument to political overreach. And so the nation found itself caught between hope and fear. 20 million cashew trees stood across the Sahel, green against the red earth, embodying both prosperity and peril. As families toasted their first profits and women claimed their independence, the whispers of doubt refused to fade. The question remained: were these trees the roots of sovereignty, or the fragile stems of another fleeting boom? And if the cashew revolution faltered, what would happen to the millions of Burkina Faso whose futures had been grafted to its branches? As Burkina Faso stands at the crossroads of its cashew revolution, the path forward is as promising as it is perilous. On one side lies the vision of a self-sufficient nation, its people enriched by orchards that defy the desert. On the other side lurks the familiar danger of dependency, corruption, and climate disaster. The next steps will determine whether 20 million trees become a fortress of sovereignty or a fragile dream washed away by drought and greed. The government's plan is ambitious. Factories are being built to process cashews locally, aiming to capture the threefold value locked inside every kernel. Training programs for youth and women are expanding, promising jobs that root families in their villages rather than forcing them abroad. Regional alliances are forming, with neighboring countries exploring cooperative strategies to dominate global markets together rather than undercut each other. If successful, the Sahel could transform from a symbol of scarcity into a hub of agricultural power. But the risks are mounting. Climate scientists warn that rising temperatures and erratic rainfall will continue to test the resilience of cashew orchards. Without irrigation systems, water storage, and diversified crops, entire harvests could vanish in a single bad season. Economists caution that global markets are unforgiving. If India and Vietnam flood the market or prices tumble, Burkina Faso's fragile gains could collapse. And domestically, whispers of corruption persist. Contracts awarded unfairly, funds siphoned, profits skimmed from the very farmers who nurtured the trees. The road ahead demands discipline. Success will depend not only on planting trees but on nurturing trust, between government and citizens, between cooperatives and traders, between Burkina Faso and its international partners. If the Cashew campaign can combine transparency, resilience, and innovation, it may set a precedent for all of Africa. A story of nations rising not by charity, but by their own hands. And yet, the final question remains as haunting as ever. Will these orchards, stretching green across the red Sahel earth, grow into a forest of sovereignty? Or will they wither into a graveyard of promises? The future of Burkina Faso may rest in the shade of 20 million cashew trees, but only time will reveal whether that shade offers shelter or shadow. From Washington to Brussels, from Beijing to New Delhi, the cashew revolution in Burkina Faso has not gone unnoticed. For the United States, the project raises both opportunities and alarms. On the one hand, American food companies see a chance to source cashews directly from Africa, bypassing Asian middlemen. Ethical branding, fair trade, locally processed, plays well in supermarkets from California to New York. But for policymakers, the stakes are broader. A more self-sufficient Burkina Faso, led by Ibrahim Traoré, signals a shift in Africa's political winds, away from dependence on Western aid and toward an assertive sovereignty that could reshape alliances. In Europe, the reaction is mixed. Buyers applaud the possibility of premium African cashews, but economists quietly warn of instability. Will the young industry collapse under climate pressure? Will Burkina Faso keep its promises of transparency? For Brussels, the cashew tree is more than a nut. It is a test of Africa's ability to control its own value chains. In Asia, the mood is different. India and Vietnam, giants of the cashew processing world, see a threat. Their industries thrive on importing raw African nuts cheaply, processing them with efficiency, and selling them back at triple the price. If Burkina Faso succeeds in processing its own harvest, those supply chains will be disrupted. Tensions are already visible, with trade journals sneering at Burkina Faso's capacity. Globally, the cashew campaign has become a symbol. To some, it represents Africa's rising confidence, a refusal to remain the continent of raw exports. To others, it is a gamble too fragile to survive global competition. And so, the world watches, waiting to see whether 20 million trees will prove that the Sahel can no longer be dismissed as barren ground, but as fertile soil for sovereignty. As the sun sinks over the Sahel, the cashew orchards of Burkina Faso cast long shadows across the red earth. To some, those shadows are symbols of pride, proof that Ibrahim Traoré dared to dream beyond drought and dependency. To others, they are warnings, reminders that ambition can wither as quickly as a young tree under a merciless sky. The paradox remains. Cashews have brought jobs, income, and dignity. Women's cooperatives have risen, children are learning new skills, and families are seeing real money in their hands. Yet dangers loom. Climate change threatens to scorch the harvest, corruption could choke progress, and global markets are ruthless, caring little for sovereignty when profits are at stake. And so the future hangs in a delicate balance. Will 20 million trees stand as a green fortress of independence, a legacy that redefines Africa's role in the world? Or will they crumble into a graveyard of promises, another failed chapter in the Sahel's long struggle against poverty and despair? For America and the world, the outcome matters deeply, because this is not just about nuts. It is about whether Africa can seize its destiny without begging at foreign tables. It is about whether nations like Burkina Faso can transform hope into sovereignty. Now the question is yours. Do you believe 20 million cashew trees can rewrite the fate of a nation? Or are we watching the roots of another illusion sink silently into the dust? If you want the world to hear stories hidden beneath the desert winds, stories of resilience, betrayal, and hope, then stay with us. Subscribe now, because the next chapter of Africa News will challenge everything you thought you knew about power, poverty, and possibility.